Alright, back for section 7.2. This is all about a very specific quadrilateral called a parallelogram. Now most of you probably already know what a parallelogram is just by looking at this picture, but a parallelogram has 5 different properties that are all going to be really important. Okay? The first property is that opposite sides are parallel. Now for those of you that don't remember, the way that you mark parallel is by these little arrows like this. So that is telling me that those two angles right there are parallel to each other. Or I'm sorry, those two sides are parallel to each other. The top is parallel to the bottom, and the left is parallel to the right. The next property is, and you probably guessed this one, is that opposite sides are congruent, which, for those of you that don't remember, congruent means the same. So top and bottom are the same, left and right are the same. So when we look at that, top and bottom are the same, left and right are the same. The next one is that opposite angles are congruent to each other. So that means that this angle and this angle are the same, and these two angles are the same. Now these are all things that I think that most of you would probably be able to figure out on your own just by looking at the picture. The next two are ones that I don't know you guys would be able to figure out as easily. Okay? This next one is that consecutive angles are supplementary. For those of you that don't remember what supplementary means, that means they equal 180 when they're added together. So this angle and this angle, when they're added together, equal 180 degrees. Okay? That also means, and I'm going to erase this, you can pause it if you need to copy this down, but that also means that this angle and this angle add up to 180 degrees. It also means that these two angles add up to 180. And it also means that these two angles add up to 180. So no matter what, any two angles that are next to each other will always, always, always add up to 180, period. Alright? So the very last thing is that diagonals bisect each other. For those of you that don't remember what the bisect means to cut into two equal pieces. So these are diagonals, and they are bisected by each other, which means that they break into two equal pieces. Okay? So each half of the diagonal is equal to the other half of the diagonal. Okay? So those are the 5 properties. The next property that you're going to see, or the next thing that we're going to talk about, is to be able to mark everything up on a parallelogram. Now, we know that the top, bottom, left, and right are congruent to each other, so I'm not going to mark that because we already know that, but what I am going to do is I am going to put the congruent marks on here because that's going to be pretty important. Okay? The next thing I'm going to do is my bisected lines, so the diagonals bisecting each other look like this. And then the final thing that we're going to put on this picture are all of the angles that are the same. Now, I said the opposite angles were congruent, which means that this big angle is congruent to this big angle, right? But since we know that these two lines are parallel, we could use alternate interior angle theorems and all that stuff to go even a step further, and we can say that these angles are congruent to each other, like that, and we can also say the same thing on the other side. These angles are the same, and also these angles are the same. Now this is what, if you think of the word parallelogram, you have to understand that this is what you should be thinking. Every time you see the word parallelogram, this is what you need to see. Now the other thing that you guys are probably thinking is that we also know that these here are congruent to each other because of vertical angles, so these two are congruent and these two are congruent. That's absolutely true. We just don't have to mark it on the picture because it's stuff that we already knew. Okay? So the next type of question that you can expect to see is one like this. This is one that we usually, we pay attention to a lot. But these are the types of questions where we are specifically being asked to find all of the measures in the parallelogram and then explain why. Okay? So we're just going to start piece by piece. So we're going to look at kg. Kg is here. This is kg. Now if I want to find kg, I know that because diagonals bisect, since diagonals bisect, those two sides are the same, which will make that 7. Now, I'm going to erase this every time on the other picture. If you need to pause it to figure out what you're looking at, do that, okay? So now, the next thing that we're going to look at is hj. So if we look at hj, hj is this long length right here. Now I again know that these and these are congruent to each other, and since this one's 8, that means this one's going to be 8, which is going to make the entire thing 16, and again, it's the exact same reason as right there. The diagonals bisect each other. Okay? So let's look at HI. HI is this top line right here, and HI is the same as the bottom, which is 16. So since the top is 16 and the bottom is 16, that's because opposite sides are congruent to each other. Not parallel, congruent. So opposite sides are congruent. So now, here's where things get a little bit trickier. The sides are always a lot easier to deal with, and the angles are a little bit more difficult. So when we're dealing with this, we have to picture these angles, and we have to look at this big picture that's right here. You have to look at this picture. That's where I'm getting all of my information from. Okay? So if I look at KJI, KJI is this big angle right here. Now I know that this big angle right here is congruent to this big angle right here, and that's nice because that angle is 84 degrees, which just is because opposite angles are congruent to each other. Okay? And this is what you have to do for the next example too, so you have another example to try the same thing out. HKJ is this big angle right here. Now the way that I'm going to do this is going to be a little bit different, okay? Because the way that we're looking at this one is because this whole angle and this whole angle are supplementary, right? Which means that they add up to 180. So I'm going to put consecutive angles equal 180 for my reason, and then I'm just going to do 180 minus 84, and that's going to leave me with 96, and 96 tells me the size of that entire angle right there. So this is 96. I don't care at all about this little 28 right here. That doesn't do anything for me. That tells me how big that little angle is right there, and that's not what I care about. Okay? So now, let's move on to the next one, and the next one is all about the little angle that we were just kind of talking about. HKI. HKI is this angle here. I have to figure out how big that angle is. Now I know this entire angle is 96, right? And if I take away this little piece of it, that'll tell me how big the other side is. So 96 minus 28, if I look at 96 minus 28, that's going to equal 68. And that's 68 degrees, and this is actually the angle addition postulate. So this is the angle addition postulate. Okay? So that takes us care of that example. The next example is also on there. Remember, your answer key is on plan book, so if you want to check your answer key to make sure that you're doing these things right, that's a great idea. Again, don't use the answer key as a cheat sheet. Don't use the answer key as a cheat sheet, because if you use the answer key as a cheat sheet, you're not going to learn any of this. Okay? So, I'll take a volunteer to pick one of these 4 questions. How about number 3? Because this one looks like it could be a little bit more challenging, because this right here has angles and it has sides on it, so we'll do both of them. Okay, so what I'm going to see here, the 2 properties that I have an angle here and an angle here, those are consecutive. So one of the properties is that consecutive angles equal 180, and then the other thing I have are these sides here, so I'm going to use also the property that opposite sides are congruent to each other. So I'm going to use that information, oops, I guess I can't move this. I'm going to use that information to help me figure out how to set up an equation. Okay, so I know I circled a whole bunch of stuff, but as we move our way through, consecutive angles add up to 180. So it's going to be f plus 30 plus 72 equals 180. My angles add together to give me 180, so now I'm just going to simplify. So I get f plus 102 equals 180. I'm going to subtract 102, and I'm going to get f equals 78. So I can see that f equals 78 degrees. Okay? Now I'm going to give you a second to look at that, and then I'm going to erase it. So if you need to see this, pause it now. And now we're going to go through the other side. The other side is just that these 2 sides are equal to each other because they're across from each other. So I get 25 equals 8g minus 3. So now when I solve this, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So I'm going to get 28 equals 8g. When I divide each side by 8, I get g equals, I believe, 3.5, right? 3.5. So I get g equals 3.5. All of these questions are pretty much done the same. I'm going to give you a little hint on this. These two things right here are the same because of diagonals bisecting each other. And then the other one that I'm going to give you a little hint on is this and this. Those are also the same because angles bisect, or diagonals bisect each other. Okay? Kept this one to about 10 minutes. That's nice for you. So now you have a little bit of time to practice. Try this one out. Hopefully this section wasn't too difficult because it's all about parallelograms, but what we're going to do next is we're going to take very special parallelograms. So we're going to talk about a different style of parallelogram after this. So that means you have to have this baseline very, very set. You have to understand what's going on with this baseline, and if you don't, then you're in big trouble. Okay, so understand the parallelograms first. If you have questions, contact me via Remind or email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you next time.